At Cabana, we understand the struggles of working in healthcare. Whether it's loss, coworker challenges, or trouble balancing work and home, we're here. And so are 85,000 peers from hospitals and health systems all across the country. Connect with others who have been there. Join our live, daily group classes for support and growth. Because finding someone who gets what you're going through shouldn't be its own struggle. Learn more at www.mycabana.health.
Welcome back to You're Always Fine, a space to show up for yourself and embrace the mess that lives underneath, because let's be real, it's exhausting always being fine. So grab your headphones and allow yourself to listen, laugh, and even cry, because you are not alone and we aren't always fine. And that's okay.
Welcome to the show, Nick. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Christine. It's great to be with you guys. Been so excited about joining you on this.
Oh, Nick, you're a part of our internal team here at Even Health, but can you go ahead and share with our listeners just a little bit about yourself, your background?
Sure. Army veteran, attended West Point back in the 90s, and then served in the Army for 7 years. Had 3 deployments, all with the 10th Mountain Division, which is based up in upstate New York. Transitioned out, wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. Knew I was good at school, but we could probably dive into my transition a little bit. But was fortunate enough to land at Syracuse University. I thought I'd just be there for a year for grad school, but was right timing, right place. Was able to join a startup research center within the university called the Institute for Veterans and Military Families, and help build out their research shop. Really kind of a one of a kind, not your typical academic center. Even though we did do research, it was very much applied and focused around designing programs and interventions that support veterans and their family members in their transition to civilian life. And so I was with them for a good 9 years until joining the Even Health team here a few months ago. And so that's sort of a high level sort of arc.
Well, I want to dive into all the feel, my hot takes on how I don't believe we, support our vets enough. But before I get there, not many of our listeners may know, the military component of Even Health. And so can you just share a little bit about your role here and, specifically with mental health,
Sure.
military?
Sure, absolutely. So I head up our public sector side of the Even Health work, and really that's focused on helping to grow our partnerships with particularly federal agencies, though also state and local folks that are looking to grow peer support opportunities. So particularly with the VA and the DoD work, we really started our work with the Air Force and the Chaplain Corps, sort of developing capabilities for anonymous peer support, and then with winning third place with the VA's Mission Daybreak Suicide Prevention Grand Challenge. And that project in particular is focused around, adapting our platform to support, provide support groups for veteran survivors of suicide attempts. And so just with that work getting up off the ground, there's just a ton of potential in terms of working closely with our VA partners to expand capabilities for peer support. It's just a big growth area for VA and state government, and even in the nonprofit and philanthropic space of folks recognizing the opportunity to get further upstream and providing access to mental health and social support earlier as an effective tool for preventing suicide.
I know for me, one of the things that I loved as a therapist when I came to Even Health was I did my research, before the interview and everything, and their whole idea about this anonymous support for veterans. I have some veterans in my family, and I've worked with veterans, and there's all the barriers we know in terms of I'll get into it, guys, the transitions and how we do the support and all that. But then there's the stigmas, and there's that internal thing that they go through, and this idea that, oh my gosh, they could address this PTSD or address these high level issues while in the comfort of the space they feel safe in, was just for me, I was why isn't this already like, what are we doing? And so I think that it really does speak to the unique, like, kind of needs of the population. And
Yeah. I mean, it's about meeting the population where they're at. I still like just reflecting back on my time in the military. And granted, I've been out for 15 years, and I think there has been some change and like positive change in terms of trying to like leadership addressing issues around help seeking and stigma. I still think there's a long way to go, but you're starting to see even messages from the top, the Pentagon, like even the Secretary of Defense issuing guidance that, mental health is health, and like the importance of whole health. And, but just reflecting back, like I transitioned out in 2007. And both I reflect back on my time, getting out, not sure, knowing what I wanted to do, even though, I like had a degree, like could get a job and things like that, but just like the loss of your tribe, your loss of your sense of purpose, you're not sure where to turn in terms of what resources are available to you. And that's really like what I've been focused on the last 10 years at IBMF and now at the Even Health. They call it the sea of goodwill. There are all these resources for veterans out there. But it makes it hard to know how and where to turn. But you have this sort of ingrained, sense of being able to, figure it out yourself. And,
also process, right? Like, I feel like the military runs on order. Maybe this is naive of me, but I think, and as someone who is worked with veterans, I'm like, I have my degree, right, is in social work, and to understand this process, and I don't get it. Like, I get stuck in different places or held up, and that's so frustrating. I definitely want to go back though to, you were saying reflecting back on transitioning. I think there's so many aspects here, and as it relates to mental health. I guess my first question though is, why do you feel that, or what do you think makes it so that it's such a barrier, right? Like that we don't like talk about it. And
well, part of it's culturally. You're just sort of built to and trained to be resourceful and only ask for help when you're truly in a bad place. And I think that
but how could you guys, I want to know, how can you guys who are in the middle of like war and putting your life on the line, how could you ever, like, if it's not that bad, like that level you're used to, that's a hard flag to like pull, right? Like to say like, oh, it's really bad. Like I think your threshold is a little different.
Yeah. I mean, so I was previously married, and I think I'm still grateful for my ex who actually dragged me into a vet center to talk to somebody, because I'd gotten out. This was right during the height of the Iraq surge. Had experienced some grief and loss, but also that loss of purpose, loss of the almost survivor's guilt. Of survivor's guilt, but also just sort of feeling like you leave your friends, the folks who've invested in you, and like there's this total loss.
And I think it's really hard when you're like, my cousin, he served in Iraq, and when he came back, him and his wife they just didn't know what to do, right? They couldn't integrate. And so he made the decision to go back to war. And like now, as a little further, like, I can understand it a little differently now, but quite honestly, I can't imagine transitioning back and then your family not understanding, right? Like why you would want to go back, like, or like there's such a disconnect.
Well, that is so true. So I remember I was after I was at SU for a while doing some research. It's funny you say that. So we were up at Fort Drum doing some focus groups with soldiers about, potentially what they would do when they would get out, and go use their GI Bill and go back to school. And in the focus groups, they're saying the exact same thing. It's like, I would rather go back to Afghanistan than go sit on a college campus just out of fear of the imposter syndrome and like what it would be like as an older adult, even in like older being like meaning like mid-20s of coming to a university
and
campus.
also in a different mindset, right? Like not in a, I'm sorry, coming back from Iraq and, me at 18, like I'm not sure, right? Like you see different things, you experience different things. And
yeah,
I mean, I think, right, connection is so important. But for whatever reason, a lot of times I feel like the military truly only is the ones, not just because they're the only ones who went through it, but I think we haven't done a good job of like, help me understand that experience for you. And I don't think you guys are going to like come and talk about your feelings to the table. Do you know what I'm saying? So I feel like there's a disconnect.
There is a disconnect, and I don't think we figure that out as a society, but I do think it's not just an American thing. It's just sort of it's such an intense experience that again, like leaning back into like why we're doing peer support, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you feel more comfortable sharing, at least initially, things you're wrestling with from what you experienced downrange, like in combat or deployed. It's just easier to open up and have that sort of sense of connection. But still, I think that's also a reflection of fewer people served today in the military. It was different, 30, 40 years ago, where you had a higher percentage of our population were connected to the military in some way, even as a family member.
Yes, and I also feel like too, it's not something we lead with. Like I felt, you know what I mean? Like I know whenever someone tells me that they have served, the first thing I think about is that this person's family, maybe because that's just the role. You know what I mean? So it's like, Thank you for your service. Thank your family for their service. Because it's like this whole unit experience. And so when you just said that, I was just like, oh my gosh, you're right. Like, when was the last time I said that, and that was just.
Now having been out 15 years too, you recognize that it's a big identity shift too, right? So like when you're first out, you're like, that is like your identity, you're like this fish out of water. You have this fish out of water or imposter type of feeling. But through time, I think, as someone who's successfully transitioned, like you don't lead with that so much,
Can I ask, do you feel like do you think it's different phases of the transition? Do you feel like you ever truly, do you ever truly phase? I mean, we're talking about, I think, just experiences that aren't to the extreme, right? Like we could get into PTSD. We could get into, some of the, and I think we're just talking about the things that happen, even if it's the best possible way it could have gone.
Mm-hmm.
But it feels like, did you ever transition fully out or?
I mean, I'm still doing.
You're working with the military, so I'm just kidding.
Exactly. So I still think that like, this is sort of this is part of, I guess, my way of wanting to continue to serve and stay connected to the community, like there's still very much a need for this work. And, I think that sort of, it goes back to my time in service and, even back, to what brought me to serve anyway, like this sort of this military family connection of, I don't think I've truly I think we're always transitioning. Transitioning is, it's not.
Yeah.
We're always transitioning, 100%. It's a process.
There's no destination, right? Like
it's a journey. Yeah, exactly.
Like everything we call life and everything we put into it, it truly is.
Yeah.
You've said a few times now, like loss of identity, loss of self. I know I struggle with that in terms of just having a rare disease. And sometimes I'm like, well, is it just that I'm older or is it like my disease? Like, you know what I mean? And so do you ever struggle with like, this idea of like shedding like who you used to be or, like talk a little bit to me about the like loss of identity piece and, you know, how do you find what your purpose is if like maybe your purpose shifted, right? Like the boy who enlisted is probably not the man who came out.
Yeah. It's a great question. I think I like the identity shift, I think was probably most acute the first few years. And I think that's pretty common for
Isn't that
a
when
lot.
the suicide rate though is the highest too?
Yeah, absolutely right. They call that the deadly gap, or the VA is now calling it the deadly gap. So the first year post transition now, like through statistics, if you want to get into the wonky side of that work, younger veterans in particular are at greater risk in that first year post transition. And a lot of it has to do with, I mean, there are a number, as you all know, like suicide's a very complicated issue. There's no one specific cause, but there are risk factors, and certainly there are a lot of heightened risk factors for veterans as they're leaving out, related to financial, employment, but also loss of social connection. Right. I think that's the biggest for me. I think even though I was still maintained a connection, with friends, and still today, like
It's also different. I just think about when I'm college or roommates, right? Whenever you have that, right? Like it is so easy when you're in just right to like build. It's an effortless connection as opposed to like even just being next door to someone. It's like, oh, I got there's more steps that it takes to Nick and I, we both live in Western New York. He doesn't want to claim Western New York, but it is Western New York. He's a Bills fan.
I'm from Michigan originally, like Buffalo.
I knew you were going to get that.
So.
No blue, I know. However, so I'm bringing this up because they're doing some, Wayne County has just gotten some sort of grant for VA, and they're building these condo buildings, right? And they are for vets, all this stuff. They are $400,000. And like they're expensive. So like, yes, I'm not saying I don't know the exact logistics, but I'm just sitting here and thinking to myself, like, that is terrifying. If I'm coming out and like, not in a bad way, things were portioned, things were like regimented for me. And now I've got to worry about this burden. So yes, thank you for finding me a house, but are you meeting them where they're at? Right? Like, are you giving them what they need and to succeed?
Yeah. It's Maslow's hierarchy, right? Mm-hmm. Like stable income, roof over your head, family and social support, and then working your way up
to self-out. Yeah.
I think that's a big challenge, especially even reflecting back on when I transitioned. I was ready. I just wanted to get out. Like they had a checklist of offices and things that you would need to.
Of course they did.
Get turn your equipment in, and get a briefing on like how to write a resume, and it's very much like the mindset of the transitioning service member is still very much of like, what do I need to do to just get out of here and turn in my ID card and drive off.
Do you remember like in high school, there was a similar like prep for college type of things where it was like, you show up for the loan ceremony, you do this, you do that. It's like, I was like, I wish someone would have like told me what like I actually was signing, or what I was like, you know what I mean? Like what I was actually getting into, as opposed to just being like, oh, we made them go do their resume. Like, okay. Because one of the things I also want to ask about like identity and what to do is how overwhelming it must be when I know how I feel when there's just two choices, chicken or pizza, but you then get out of the military where it's like, what to expect. It's going to be consistent. It's going to be structured, and humans do much better with structure and consistency. And then you take away the choice part of it, you get orders. And while not for everyone, most humans at a level really do thrive in that kind of environment. And then you kind of get thrown back into real life. And I hope I'm not the first person to break the news, but life has actual no rule book. And, you have to do all that like cognitive load on yourself.
Yeah. Oh, you think like even, um, my former boss always like tells this joke. And so like, he is also Air Force veteran, like PhD business professor. But like when he got out, um, he's like, how do I schedule a dentist appointment? Like, how do I
No.
even do this? Cause like, it's all there for you. You're issued practically literally everything. It's like, it's so,
And I'm not, like I said, I
um,
don't want to like, I'm not trying to glorify, I'm just
yeah,
trying to say though that that's a really difficult transition. Like just,
it's all those little things. And of course, like that's sort of it's not trivial. It's not trivial, but like, if you think about that in the context of all the other things that folks are thinking about, like, um, finding a job, and just finding the first job, like that's one of the big things that we were focused on at IBMF was around the employment transition. You have a lot of folks that they're actually really interested or turn to small business ownership, in part because they made like the work, like fitting into the civilian workplace isn't for everyone. But so like you've got a high percentage of folks that are turning to, business ownership is one pathway, but just also helping folks understand, like, it's like how to fit in a civilian workplace setting is more than just like a tutorial on how to write a resume, right?
yeah.
And how to translate your skills and speak
But
just
also
like
too,
the
and I
vernacular.
think, right, so let's say you're even bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, you got your checklist done, you did your resume thing, then you go and you realize something as simple as like, maybe you just don't know what grocery, like, right, or something very trivial, right? I have to think then there's gotta be some sort of imposter syndrome or like feeling, I don't want to say dumb, right? Like, it's like, I should know this and I don't in this context. And so that then affects your ability to go forward and go for the job you want. And I feel like it's like small micro doses of that, even for the bushy eyed and ready to go out of the military, I think ends up where we're in this vicious cycle. I just want to know your thoughts on that and like that, what you end up negative self-talk does that end up being for you when you can't do
Yeah. I
something
mean,
like
I
you could.
certainly, so no, so for one thing, I landed at Syracuse, for grad school. I mean, I interviewed, um, as I was getting out with an engineering company, but just, part of it was the identity thing is like, I just wanted to continue to serve. And like in some ways, going back to grad school was like a way to just buy myself time.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, let's figure it out. And never in my wildest dreams had I thought about going after a doctorate, but um, had a professor who encouraged me to consider it. And, again, decided to give it a try, but was still very much felt that I was an imposter, like I should be back, like leading troops in combat. And, what am I doing here?
Well, imposter sounds a little bit like you said, survivor's guilt. And I find it funny too. Your wildest dreams, you said you couldn't imagine having a doctorate, but then, a professor, right? Like that same kind of dynamic,
Yeah.
I'm not saying it was orders, but right. Like it becomes like easy to be more, I think, like passive as opposed to purpose, like, like to what you're saying, like
Yeah.
don't grab the first job or don't, do
Yeah.
that. And also school has a flow, right? Like, so it's like in terms of buying time, I'm sure that that's like a good one, right? Like I can externally have a purpose. Everyone can understand this, but I can also, I know this and this happened at school.
Yeah. And I very much, at least in the first year or two, it was kind of one of those things where you start to get a sense for like, okay, they're like your peers in school are looking at you, are like, who is this guy? Like coming with like also from a genuine place of curiosity. But then I'm like, am I like these folks, a lot of them have parents or like they're or who are faculty members or so like understand like how to navigate higher ed in a way that I didn't. I was kind
in
of
a
like,
way that you know how to navigate, your base probably, right? Like that.
right. So it took time to sort of work through and sort of figure that out.
So I was just wondering if, you 15 years, I would, agree you're very successful. Do you ever get any of that like imposter syndrome back, or has it kind of passed?
Always, I think like public speaking, depending on the venue. But like being invited to testify in the Senate a few years back, like for my first time for like, what am I doing here? But sure, I think, but it's also, I think over time you just recognize that like that's a natural feeling. And, I guess you don't feel that way if you don't care about what you do, and that's what I tell myself, at least,
My last question for you is, if you could go back and tell your 18-year-old self the day one before you even you're about to enter boot camp, what would you tell him?
It may not all play out like you think it will, but it will work out.
I love that. Is there anything you would tell those who want to support and help build that connection with you? What's the advice you have for them?
Sure. There are no shortage of incredible organizations that are doing great work supporting veterans. Some that many know about, Wounded Warrior Project, certainly the Institute for Veterans of Military Families, where I came from, is supporting thousands of veterans and their family members in transition. One in particular, if you're looking to give back and support veterans that are transitioning into your community, is an organization called Onward Ops. And they are a peer support organization that is partnered with the VA, where you can I am actually a trained peer sponsor as a volunteer. And they're always looking for, you don't have to be military connected. And frankly, I would argue that it's even better if you're not. And it's a great way to help an individual veteran or their family member navigate to different resources and supports in your community as they take the uniform off. Sorry, break. What was help me with the last part? You're muted. I can't hear you.
I said, thank you for saying break. You'd be surprised how many times just like having that word, knowing I can cut the entire thing out. So I was just saying you went from like micro to mezzy, and now I was just wondering if you can go like, just like as a person, like, so if someone is new into your organization, someone is like, how can you make a connection with them? In a way that, is, not being a shitbag.
Sure. Yeah. So, if you're looking for a way to engage a veteran in your company or a neighbor recently moved back, everybody talks about, thank you for your service. For some, it can be even an awkward thing to say for some, because many just volunteered and did their thing. And, I think the best way to engage is just to ask about their service. Like, oh, did you serve? Where did you serve? Tell me more about that, and sort of invite them into being able to share what they're willing to share. And I think that's probably the best way, in my opinion, of being able to just strike up a relationship and learn a little bit more.
I think that that's so powerful. Mostly, I feel like that just hit home for me. Obviously, we talked about this in the beginning of the episode about my feeling like I have to thank them. But for me, I'm an inquisitive person, I always am looking like, oh, tell me more. But I do feel like it starts to feel like I've never thought of that. I'm like, yeah, why don't I just ask, like, where did you serve? What was your experience? And so I love this idea of just like investing that time into, not that your gratitude can be shown through your curiosity, I guess.
100%. That's a great way of putting it.
Seriously, you're fine. You're fine because you have the power to access your place of peace anytime you need it. However, if you get stuck, we're right at the palm of your hand to help. Check out our show notes for this week's source list, recommended content, and Cabana live group schedule. We'll catch you next week for a brand new episode of You're Always Fine.
The team at Cabana has found your reset button. The answer? Cabana Pods, acoustic soundproof booths with immersive micro vacations proven to boost your mood in just 5 minutes. To learn more about Cabana Pods, visit www.evenhealth.com/pods.